All right, so we will take on topic number 2, which is traditional system of dispute resolution. And I believe before now, I gave a summary of what our expectations should be on this particular topic. So, by way of introduction, if you have gotten the topic right, which is the traditional system of what? Dispute resolution. Now, the first thing we must establish is that conflicts have been prevalent in traditional African society, and oftentimes they have their origin in certain aspects of our lives. I said conflict has been what? Prevalent in indigenous traditional society. And what brings about these disputes? Like I said when I was introducing this topic, I said various issues of life bring about dispute. Some of them may be inheritance. I'm sure you must have heard, if you have not seen, that a man who has 5 children and the man died without making a will, that one of the children will want to acquire everything that their father left behind. You've not seen before? Without considering the rest of the family. And then the rest of the family will begin to agitate. Our father did not give birth to you alone. We are all children of this man, Mr. Agbaje. Is there one Mr. Agbaje in the class? You are Agbaje? Aha. That means our spirit is working together. But not your own Agbaje. So, there are several aspects of our lives that can bring about disputes. And it is obvious that conflict is a natural phenomenon. We cannot indeed, try to say that it is unusual for people to not to have conflicts. After all, I'm not sure there's anybody in this class who has not beaten his tongue before. Is there anybody? There's nobody who has not mistakenly beat his tongue. Especially for those of us that like to still talk while we are eating. Meaning that as close as the teeth is to the tongue, there can still be what? Conflict. So, in any society where human beings exist, it is absolute to conclude, or it is easy to conclude, that there will always be disputes. And in that case, if there is always disputes, then there is always the need to determine how the dispute can be resolved. So, in Nigerian society, the understanding of conflict and its corruption was anchored on the dissatisfaction between humans and the supernatural. That is the belief that the reason for conflict in the society is due to the conflict between human beings and what? And the supernatural. What are the supernatural? The ones you cannot see. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's a Monday. I can walk to work. Oh. All right.
So maybe that's what. 8
Okay.
in the morning.
All right.
So 12 by 11.
Welcome, sir. Yes, sir. All right. Sorry for the break. So, it is believed that the reason for conflict is due to the interaction between human beings and the supernatural. And then they believe that it is only when human beings have refused to do what they're supposed to do that there will be conflicts. Of course, it is usually so. When you cannot abide by the terms of your relationship, definitely there will be dissatisfaction between parties, and then it can lead to breakdown of relationship. And it has been seen also that in these disputes or conflict that we are talking about, there are usually parties to it. And in indigenous African society, it is believed that the first party to the conflict, they are usually human beings, while the second party is what? The supernatural, as we have mentioned. Yes, the gods of the land will have some form of expectations from the human beings that live on the land. Now recall that what we are trying to do is to dig so deep into the indigenous African society. Of course, that is our origin, and that is what will lead us to look at the system of dispute resolution, which of course is one of the key function or role of the what? Of the judiciary. So, conflict can be derived or is seen to become obvious within the society because of different factors, and they can also be based on different factors again. Like I said, number one, it can be based on economic issues, it can be based on family issues, it can be based on chieftaincy issues, so also with social and religious factors. In other words, all of these areas of life are the areas that can bring about conflict within the society. So, having said that, we now look at, in specific now, sources of conflicts in indigenous society. You can see that in the introduction we did, number one, conflict must ensue. And then, who are the parties? We have said, usually, the human being and what? And the supernatural. And again, you want to ask, why the supernatural? It is also believed that the supernatural can cause a man and a woman to fight. So that is the belief that the supernatural force is behind. So as we move on now to look at sources of conflict in indigenous African society, we will begin to have a better understanding of what we are talking about. Now, what do we mean by a source of a thing? A source of a thing or concept can simply be defined as the origin or the genesis of it. Of course, this word source, it's not a new term to us. So, it is a source or the origin of a thing. And of course, the source also talks about where a thing derives its authority from. The source of my power in this class is because the university has employed me to lecture in this university. So that's another. Of course, I believe you also remember we're talking about sources of Nigerian law. We've discussed extensively about that, and we talked about the fact that the sources refer to where our laws are derived from. Okay, so I noted in my jottings here that a source signifies a reference point. A source signifies a reference point suggesting authoritative allusions. And therefore serves as the fundamental basis of the existence of knowledge. A source signifies a reference point suggesting authoritative allusion and therefore serves as the fundamental basis of the existence of knowledge about what is being referred to. About what is being referred to. So, what we are referring to this afternoon is what? Conflicts. Where does conflict comes from? That now we require the intervention of the judicial arm of government or the traditional system, as the case may be. So, like I said before, chieftaincy title issues is one of the prevalent sources of conflict in traditional African society. Of course, this includes tussle towards emerging either as the foremost traditional ruler or in occupation of a particular position within the society. Of course, we are not unaware of the fact that sometimes the right people are not put in position. When such situations occur, you see people who believe that it is their turn. By virtue of the history of the community, they believe that it's their turn. And then, just like in our contemporary Nigeria, what do you think people fight for more? Power. And that's why you see a governor will wake up today and will say, I and my commissioners, we are moving to what? The other party. Why? Because they want to what? To retain power. And then the concerns of the citizens are quite secondary. They do all they do just because they want to what? They want to remain in power and all of that. So, that is one of the major sources of conflict in the indigenous African society. Another source is breakdown of diplomatic relations among various societies. Breakdown of diplomatic relations among various societies. We are not unaware, or of course, maybe probably some of you do not like history. You hear of intra or inter-community conflicts. There was a time that the Ife Bodakeke war was so common. People talk about it every time. You have not heard of that before. Maybe they had the one that are a bit of age of you will remember. But of course, one of the things that was prevalent in the indigenous African society is the fact that the society is seen as one. So when there is, conflict on one part, it affects, the entire body of the society. So the intercommunal conflict and violence is another source of conflict in indigenous African society. This can include invasion of territories. Maybe some individuals will leave a particular region, go to another region to colonize them. Or it can also cover areas like boundary disputes. I think recently either Akwa Ibom and one other states are having that issue presently, even in what we can call a contemporary Nigeria. So, sometimes all of these situations leads to war. And then, even the individual actors that are involved also usually escalates these issues, because the chiefs of this particular part and the chiefs of this particular part cannot be friends when there is conflict between the two communities, and so on and so forth. Then the question then will be, what are the features of indigenous conflict resolution? What are the features? Mind you, the features we want to look at also mean the characteristics of indigenous conflict resolution. You recall or you remember that our focus is not the conflict itself. Rather, we're talking about how the conflict can be what? Can be resolved. So that's our focus, and therefore we shouldn't shift our focus from that aspect of the discussion. So now the question then therefore is that, what are the features? The notable features of conflict resolution I'll repeat again. The notable feature of this conflict resolution stood Africans in the vantage position of demonstrating their culture. I said the notable features of this conflict resolution stood Africans in the vantage position of demonstrating their culture. And of course, this is why in the pre-colonial African society, peace and harmony somehow reign supreme and often produce unique atmosphere for peace to thrive, which then leads to what? To development. Now, what we are trying to say here is that dispute resolution mechanisms that are prevalent in Africa put Africa in a vantage position of displaying their culture, which is to the effect that in the indigenous African society, peace is usually what? The ultimate goal. And then in our culture also, the African culture, peace is seen to be the ultimate, what the society looks towards. Hardly will you see African society fighting war against each other, even though there may be pockets of disagreement here and there. And again, if a particular country is to go into war with any country, let's say for example an African country, you always discover that war cannot happen, because we have a way of seeking for peace. And that's what we are trying to say there. And this was also part of the features of the indigenous African society, meaning that even though conflict must arise, but how to resolve this conflict is usually of a great concern to the society. And then apart from that, when there is peace in the society, it is believed that it will bring development. Because in a society where there is fight, there is rancor, there is chaos here and there cannot be development. You agree with that? So therefore, for development to thrive, there must be peace in the society. So these features of indigenous conflict resolution in Africa deals with some models. Okay, it engages some models, and this model is usually anchored on what we call dramatization of the issues involved in conflicts. This model is anchored on the dramatization of the issues involved in the conflicts. And what do we mean by that? It's just like acting out the conflicts. Are you getting me, class? It's just like trying to act. If there's a dispute between two individuals, usually they will dramatize what the issues are between them. And this is to allow the society to see the issues that are involved. So that's why we're saying that the features of the indigenous conflict resolution is anchored on what? Dramatization of the issues involved in the conflict. And then that means it involves some level of performance, maybe dramatic performance, where you will have people who come together to act the dispute that is, the conflict that has arisen between the parties. And then in the process, the society will learn their lesson from it. And in learning the lesson is to prevent a reoccurrence of such disputes in the society. So this is one of the very unique way that we need to appreciate as we talk about this dispute resolution. They turn it into a drama. And then when you look at the drama, you look at it over and over, you look at the actors involved, you look at the role they play, what they are trying to do is to instill in the society the idea of critically examining issues and possibly seek for the best way to resolve issues. And that's why we are saying that the features of the indigenous African society is anchored on dramatization of what? Of the issues. And then will it now involve different actors. Some of them include the elders, the priests, the 8th grade, the chiefs, even the kings. They play prominent role in the dispute resolution system. And then the stage is usually set for all these people to play their roles. That's why if an issue has arisen, they take it to the palace, right? Where they call the elders who are knowledgeable in the culture of the people to do what? To act out different rules to ensure that there is peace. So that will lead us to the different places that those resolutions or those disputes were managed, and the name we can refer to them today. In the Indigenous African Society, the home front is a place for dispute resolution, and it is common to what we have today as family courts. Do you get that? The home front is a form of stage for dispute management in the Indigenous African Society. Today, don't we still settle issues within the family? And that's what we're saying, that was the family court of the Indigenous African Society, where the elders of the family plays what important role in what? In settling the disputes, which also amount to resolving whatever conflict may be before the parties that are involved. Another stage that is used for dispute resolution is the markets. Issues that are likely to be tried in the market will include what? Buying and selling. What? Stealing. Yes. What else? But one thing that will stand out to describe this activity is commercial activities, isn't it? That is the commercial courts of the Indigenous African Society. Okay? Then the streets is another place of prominent importance in the indigenous traditional conflict resolution. The streets, that is an avenue where people meet on the street to do what? To resolve dispute. Today, I don't know if any of you have been caught by Kai before. Kai. These people that wear green and all of that. Or you've heard of mobile court before, which is not the usual conventional court that we have. So the streets stage for dispute resolution can be referred to as the open courts. What did I say? It can be referred to as what? The open courts. Just like we said, the home can mean as family courts. The market can be what? Commercial courts. The streets can be what? Open courts. The last one here is the palaces. The palace. The palace serves as what? A royal court. Royal what? Royal court. And today, the stage now includes all these that we have mentioned, but with unique names. These names are what we have mentioned to include commercial court, right? Family court. Today, social media is another court. You don't agree? That's why many of you don't want to be taken to court. You don't want to commit crime that will make them to show your face on Crime Fighter. So, it is very important for you to understand that the performance of conflict resolution from African perspectives were the likes of African judges and adjudicators, which of course will include all the people that we have mentioned in the course of our discussion. And then it will involve adjudicators, it will involve litigants. The litigants are the parties that are what? That are involved. While the adjudicators are who? Those that judge the case. Let me use that language so that you can have a better understanding. The litigants are the complainants and the what? And the plaintiff. That is the person who has come to report. And then the adjudicators are those who provide the services of settling the dispute. And then in all of these, we always have witnesses, isn't it? Whether false witnesses or witnesses of truth, they always come to testify in all of this so that the dispute that is between the parties can be adequately resolved. Now we move on to look at the traditional institutions for conflict resolution. Traditional what? For conflict resolution. So the first question we need to ask ourselves is, what are institutions? What are these institutions? Institutions are set up or established for achieving some goals of development. Institutions are set up or establishment or organization for achieving some goals of development. These institutions can include personalities or infrastructures. They can include personalities and infrastructures upon which the development of the society is anchored. For those that have been following this lecture closely, when we talk about those who are personalities in terms of institution, those that were mentioned earlier as people who play important roles in dispute management will easily come to your mind. But of course, as we go on here, we will understand what we mean by these institutions. Okay, so I'd like to say also that these institutions were characteristically modeled along the line of public will. These institutions were characteristically modeled along the line of public will and associational trust. Along the line of public will and associational trust, especially when they have been coached in truthful operations and pragmatic dynamism. I'll repeat that again for those who are writing. These institutions were characteristically modeled along the line of public will and associational trust, especially when they have been coached in truthful operation and pragmatic dynamisms. So what are these institutions? Number one is economic institutions. Economic institutions, which include the markets, as we have mentioned earlier, where we did establish that in the markets, commercial disputes are what? Are settled there. The second one is the social institutions. Social institutions, this will include the age grade and professional associations. Of course, you know the role the age grade plays in community development when you delve into the indigenous African society. We also have religious institutions. Religious institutions, these include deities, ancestors, and sanctuaries. Deities as in Deities, ancestors, and sanctuaries. So these institutions involve at different times and places in our society. These institutions involved at different times and places in African society, and they have been involved and they have been involved they had been purposeful towards enhancing the social engineering. They had been purposeful towards enhancing the social engineering which foster wholesome unity in diversity across cultural boundaries. Which fosters wholesome unity. Wholesome as in WHOLESOME. Wholesome unity in diversity across cultural boundaries. So in all of these traditional institutions we are talking about were the institutions that enhance the adjudicatory process in our society then, that helps to achieve peace at all costs by settling disputes between the various communities or individuals in the society. Then we'll now look at African traditional methods of conflict resolution. African what? Traditional methods of conflict resolution. We're going to look at them one by one. We'll look at the various importance that they hold as means or methods of dispute resolution. Number one, we have the negotiation method. Negotiation method. What do you understand by that method? Anybody? Yes. Stand up and speak to us so that we can hear you. Like what? Like a dialogue. I like the word dialogue because it says so much about what we are talking about. Yes, any other point? Yes. Okay, when two or more, when the two people in dispute come together to have conversation in order to arrive at a conclusion or a way of settlement. Yes. Yes, please. Yes, direct communication. Okay. Yes, all that they have said are quite correct. So now let's look at what we have. Number one, negotiation method. Negotiation entail systemic analysis of cooperation. Negotiation entails systemic analysis of cooperation, compromise, and consensus. Negotiation entails systemic analysis of cooperation, compromise, and consensus to the extent that agreement was reached at the end of the controversy. Negotiation entailed systemic analysis of cooperation, compromise, and consensus to the extent that agreement was reached at the end of the controversy. All of those grammar that you have heard is what these three people of four have summarized in their response. Because when you approach a table for negotiation, you do what? You dialogue, isn't it? You share. The party A will say his own, party B will also what? Say his own. Apart from that, we talk about cooperation in what I just read to you, right? If there is no cooperation, the parties will not come together. That's number one. We talk about what other thing there? Compromise, right? What do we mean by compromise? Now, to simplify it, sometimes you may be entitled to maybe 10 tubers of yam from somebody else, and then the person is not able to deliver it. I say, okay, for peace to reign, let me have 8. Go and get 8 for me. It's a form of what? Compromise, that you are changing your stand. Changing your stand in this way is to accommodate peace. Of course, the word compromise can be used in another form to mean something. When you take a bribe, you have compromised your stand. When you also give, what has happened? For those of you that give, tell me now. All right, so apart from cooperation, compromise, we talk about what? Consensus. What is the consensus? People eventually come to an agreement, right? To say, okay, let's just settle it this way. So that's what negotiation is all about. So negotiation as a method in conflict resolution in African traditional society is one of the major methods of what? Of resolving disputes. And it is all about this positive perception of agreement that eventually results in people cooperating together, having compromise, and coming to a consensus at the end of the day. And the aim of negotiation is to secure an amicable settlement of whatever the issues may be. And of course, there is probably no issue that may be too intense or too technical that cannot be what? Negotiated. As a matter of fact, countries negotiate when they have conflicts. Okay? Now, what then therefore is the significance of the negotiation method? What is the significance of the negotiation? We need to take note of this significance that we're going to be talking about. Number one is equal treatment of parties to the conflicts. Equal what? Equal treatment of parties to what? To the conflicts. If there is no equal treatment, the other party will not cooperate. Do you agree? If you are going for a settlement case or you want to settle something, and then you can see signs that the other party is not, will be more favored than you, you are not likely to submit yourself to what? To the meeting or to the negotiation table, because you believe that you will not have a fair deal on that table. So it's central to negotiation that the parties must be treated what? Equally. Number two, there must be mutual understanding for the parties to the conflict and the negotiation team. There must be what? Mutual understanding for the parties to the conflict and the negotiating team. Another significance of the negotiation method is that there must be a proper understanding of the issues that is associated with the what? The conflicts. There must be what? Proper understanding of the issues associated with the conflicts. That's another significance. Another one is setting good agenda for the development of the society. Setting good agenda for the development of what? Why? How does that indeed bring development to the society? It does in the area of, if there is no peace in the society cannot what? It cannot develop. So, negotiation method of conflict resolution was a systemic way of reaching points of agreement, thereby enabling what we call tripod quality of cooperation, compromise, and what? And consensus. I'll repeat again that negotiation method of conflict resolution was a systemic way of reaching points of agreement and thereby enabling the tripod quality of cooperation, compromise, and what? And consensus. The second method, mediation method. Mediation method. What is mediation? Mediation is an act of intervening in a conflict situation. Mediation is an act of intervening in a conflict situation. It is the interventionist process. It is the interventionist process allowed for installing common ground for restoring friendly relations. I'll repeat that again, that mediation is the interventionist process allowed for installing common ground for restoring friendly relations. And how then does this play out in the indigenous African society? This is a situation where the parties will submit themselves to a neutral third party who will mediate, who will listen to their story. Yes, in negotiation, there may be no need for a third party, so to speak, right? The two parties can come together on their own and say, let's look at the best way to resolve these disputes, right? But in mediation, there is a neutral third party who will listen to the stories of both sides and do what? And help them to manage their disputes. And mediation has a indigenous African method of dispute resolution has helped to maintain harmony, to maintain peace within the society. Because peace, harmony is central to the existence of traditional African society. And at every point in time, the society is striving for peace and what? And harmony. So everything that will enhance peace and harmony or harmonious living within the society is always encouraged. And that's one of the major roles that mediation method plays in dispute resolution in the indigenous African society. Because it is believed that the cord of relationship and that cordial atmosphere must not be broken. And that's why in the indigenous African society, it is forbidden for you to see two people fighting and you don't separate them. Why? Because the society believes that when you intervene, when you try to separate them, you can broker peace, isn't it? But what do we see these days? When two people are fighting, what happens? What? You video them. That is what we do these days, because we are no longer our brother's keeper. And then when you do it, people now make money through all of those things. Am I correct? Yes. The bloggers here will testify to what I'm saying. They say, come and see you. Neighbors, they don't break each other head. They will now put their picture on one side and they'll be showing the fight. In the indigenous African society, that was not permissible. As a passerby, you are forbidden to see people fighting and you walk away. So you must make effort to ensure that peace is what is restored, because it is part of our social responsibility to be our what? Our brother's keeper. But what we do these days is that we make money from our brother's problem. Because at the end of the day, when the video is on the social media, you make money, right? And then it further fuels the anger between the two parties. When we say, if you have not made me to fight, I will not be on the internet, isn't it? And that again can even breed further problem within the society. So that's why you see that the indigenous African society on its own already had a system that was indeed working for it. If you recall, when we're talking about sources of law, one of the major things we did establish was that before we were colonized, before the foreign laws were introduced, we already had what? Our own system of law that helped us to manage our affairs from time to time. Therefore, all of these that we are talking about were the major features of the society we had. How passerby must ensure that there is peace between individuals in the society. As a matter of fact, the gods can be angry with a passerby who fails to do what? To mediate. You are laughing. You wouldn't know whether some people have lost their lives, because those kind of things can provoke the gods. That's why every passerby were duty bound to intervene to resolve conflicts within or in their environments. Okay, so I think we should just peg our, we should just stop there for today. What? What's the time? 1:30, 1:18. All right. So let's stop there for today. But before we go, let's do a recap of what we've talked about today. Of course, basically, we've looked at what the traditional system of dispute resolution is all about. Can you listen, please? And we did establish that it is not uncommon for there to be conflict within the society, and that when there is conflict, there is always effort to see how it can be resolved. And again, that different institutions have been set up to do what? To resolve issues. And this institution usually include personality and institutions. Of course, we made mention of the traditional rulers, the 8th grade, the chief, elders, and also we talk about where this dispute can be resolved. We made mention of what? Of the marketplace that settles commercial issues. We also made mention